It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. I'm waiting for it to say we're recording. We're back for another podcast. Hi, everybody. Let's go around the horn, say hello, and introduce yourselves. Chad Jetner.
I'm Chad Jetner. Thanks, Kyle.
I'm Peter Lawrence.
And I'm Mike Wong.
And I'm Kyle Bacher. And today we're going to talk about job security. Is there such a thing?
Yes and no. How about that? Let's go wishy-washy right away.
I'm going to say it's not necessarily something you have as much as it's something you feel.
I can go with that. How about if it's something that you are? You are your own job security.
That I would agree with.
So you can.
And I think like living in that paradigm will give you the feeling of good job security. So Mike, how long have you been doing this project tech type consulting stuff? Scrumming?
I've been doing this probably going to take about 20 years for the project management side of things. And then probably in IT about close to 30 years now.
So
and I'm 31 years old, by the way.
Yeah. So after your first job and you got your second job, right at the end of your first job for whatever company that was, you're like, this is it, I'm done. I'll never get another job again. You probably had a lot of fear and trepidation. So how does that differ now? Because I was the same way. I think everybody is when they're young starting out.
Yeah. I think it was interesting because, for me, my first job was back in the 90s, right? So it was a totally different world of job searching, right? There was a lot more it wasn't so much of the networking thing as it is today. There was no LinkedIn. There was still monster.com and some of these other sites that were dice.com that were sites that people used for job searches.
Wait,
and that
did
was
those
still
exist
kind of a
when
big
you
thing.
searched?
Yeah, those existed, and those were going around back in the early 90s, and so I used those. And those were pretty big sites back then, and I think that I got hooked up with connections for my first jobs through that and through people I had worked with before. One job was one where I actually had worked with a sales guy. He hopped ship and went to a different company, and then he called me and said, "Hey, would you like to come over and join me over here?" So that was a connection because I knew somebody there, but it wasn't hey, I'm just making networking for the sake of doing networking like you would in LinkedIn, right?
Right.
So, but there's definitely a lot of that. But this kind of goes back to to your question, Kyle, which is that how did I feel about it? It's I think that it's if you're making a move because you feel gosh, I've got to get out of here, I'm just not happy doing what I'm doing. It's what do you need to be ready, right? And there was that thought of do I have something that other people want? And I think
the other side of that is what if you really like what you're doing and you're worried about losing that? Yeah. So
that's the worst trepidation that ever is.
I
really like it here. I never want this to end. And wait, and Mike, you mentioned early 90s. We've gone through the 2000 .com thing. We've gone through 2008.
Yep.
We didn't go through 1929 because none of us are that old, but well, maybe in our hearts, but
even in the whatever that late 90s, early 2000s recession was, because I'm like Mike, I've 25 years doing this now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I've outside of that first year, I've never felt insecure about a job, getting a job, right? Even if what I was in at the time folded overnight, I was fine always.
So let me ask this question. And this is a total personal question, and ignore it if you want, but has anyone been laid off or had their company disappear?
Yes.
Yep.
I've
twice.
Never.
Yeah.
So I've been involved. I've been around when we have had mass layoffs, and maybe this is where some of the confidence comes from. And I've always survived. And so I've been around organizations that had to cut.
Yep.
I've been the organization that has done the cuts, and I'm still not worried. And then even going through that, everybody that we cut, they had a rough afternoon and a bad night, And then the next day we helped him get new gigs and everybody was fine, like literally everybody. The best part about some of that is that sometimes that happens, not even sometimes, I think almost everybody that I remember working with during those times that had gotten cut or whatever, moved on to something even better.
Right.
And so sometimes a mass culling is the best opportunity for growth for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
There's definitely something to be said about that. I've heard lots of stories of people who felt like they were getting comfortable where they were, and then because of that, they found something better. But that said, there's still anxiety associated with that moment in time. So there's also, like I've been, the first time I was laid off, I'll give you some backstory to this. The first time I was laid off, I was working for this company. It was a startup company based out of California. And at the time I was trying to move to Minnesota to be with my fiance then, who's my wife now. And what happened was that I changed roles within the company to one where I could travel 100% of the time. So that means I didn't need to be based in California. Okay, great. So I changed roles, and then a couple months later, I'm in the role. I'm actually at that point I was an instructor, actually teaching courses, but flying all over the U.S. like teaching, corporate training courses, right? And so I'm doing a training course, and then I get this new manager assigned to me for this whole department, which is kind of unusual. It's like, well, okay, that's strange. And then it says, well, I'm just going to kind of shadow you for this 1 week's course that we're doing in LA and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. I'm just kind of seeing what, what all the instructors are doing. I'm going to shadow, you and a couple others. Like, okay, that's great. I'm teaching the class. And then Wednesday morning is a 5-day class. So I've taught the first 2 days. And then, Wednesday morning, or Tuesday night, I said, hey, let's have breakfast on Wednesday morning. So, okay, great. Get up early, meet up for breakfast. I said, well, unfortunately, this isn't just about breakfast in the training course. I've got to let you go because we're actually having layoffs across the company, and they just said this was the day we're going to do it. So I was actually sitting in to make sure that we can continue the course after you're gone. Like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. So that was a pretty stressful, time because like here I am, like I'm on the road, just moved to Minnesota.
Yeah.
And I don't have a job, don't know anybody in Minnesota. Like, what am I going to do?
Did you get to finish the week out for the course?
Nope.
Or nope? You got on a plane?
He said, yeah, take the next flight up, pack your bags, check out the hotel, and then hop in the next flight out. So by like Wednesday afternoon, I was back here in Minnesota. And
what's that flight like?
As a follow-up to that story was that I had, some of the students in the class had apparently, I knew some of the students because, through other friends of friends and through other instructors I knew. And they said they had reached out and says, wow, the guy who took over the course from me was really bad. They really wanted you back. Like, sweet. So I felt like a little vindication there. Like, yes.
I had, the first time I got laid off from a job I really liked. I'd been there 3.5 years, and they were going to go public, and they needed to show profitability and stuff. So they cut deep. And I was the tech support guy that had to round up equipment, shut off accounts, all that kind of stuff. So I was last.
Did you know you were on the list at that when they told, or did they wait until you got?
I had one guy that reported to me that was like my right-hand man, my assistant, and he got paid much less than I did. And like when I went to the meeting, they stopped me before I got to my desk. Like they didn't let me go to my computer that morning. So when I walked in, they were lying in wait for me.
Oh,
nice.
Like
and they pulled me into an office, and it was the guy that had replaced the guy that had replaced the director. And the HR director. And, I had really good relationships with all of them. And so they were, and I was like just stunned. And they told me like the whole story. And then they showed me the severance package. This is great.
Sign me up.
And I'm like, yeah. And this is what I said, because I had worked like 30 jobs before then and can do a number of different things. I said, don't worry about me. Like, I'm Obi-Wan Kenobi. I said, cutting me down will only make me stronger. And shook hands, and they got rid of me. And then Johnny, my assistant, quit a week later, went back to bartending because he couldn't do all the stuff. Like, he was not qualified to take over that position.
Right.
And both positions. And so then they brought in a different guy, and he called me like 4 or 5 times, and I answered his questions. I
Wow.
wasn't like vindictive or Vin Diesel, whatever you call it. Well, I felt like it wasn't his fault, and he was new, and he walked into a tough situation.
Yeah.
So I didn't do it for my company. I did it for my brother in IT.
That
Like
was nice.
a brother tech support guy out there that needs to know that the Sybase key is BY, BK, BY, IODJ, yeah, whatever.
Whoa. No secrets on
I'm not
the
going to do
show.
the whole thing, but I still remember it, and it's been over 20 years. But that, my biggest fear of job security that ever happened was when SharePoint got rid of the GUI for their designer app that I used like for everything. And
That's when you knew you were done.
That's when I had to make a big change and figure out some other way to like do the projects and stuff. And I did. I figured it out. So I wasn't too worried. So I do feel like I have job security. I work really hard at stuff, and I try not to anger people. I try not to upset Chad.
So you
Is that what you're saying though? Like your job security comes from the fact that you know that your tech stack and your skill set is strong, right?
Yes.
And that's 100% of where it comes from for you.
Well, and also I've done so many different things that I can fall back on. I can I can go do sales. I can go deliver pizza. I can wait tables. I can do things to fill gaps.
Yeah, but
until I
at this
can
point in
find
my
another
career, we're
thing.
not necessarily job security. Doesn't mean, if all else fails, I'm going to deliver pizzas or I'm going to work at McDonald's, right? That's the opposite of that.
But it's like I'm not going to be completely hosed.
Dude, Chad, I think this is a good point though, because I think that in this point in our career, so if you're like at, let's say, mid-career, right, you've established yourself in whatever your practice area is. There's different ways that some people approach looking at job security, right? Personally, like I've survived like you. I also survived like in a company where there's multiple wave after wave of layoffs. But I survived because people said, "Wow, he's really good, does his stuff, gets it done," right? And so I want to be then known as the guy who delivers something, or delivers more than they expect, right? Because that's the type of person who is always going to be successful wherever they go, right? And to me, that's like job security, because if I'm like looking to like bring someone to my team, that's the person I want to get on my team. And those people are, obviously, people that, we surround ourselves with as much as we can. Right. Then there's the other type of individual, which I've seen a lot of them at different places, where the people that are passive aggressive, that I'm not going to share any of my valuable, super secret, like coven of information with you, because that might threaten my job, right? And to me, those are the people I feel like, gosh, they're really hard to work with, because I can't get information from them. They're always protective. Right. They're like managing their fiefdoms, right? And it's almost like they're so intent on protecting their job security by keeping some information proprietary to them and them alone, or some function of what they do, that to me, like as a leader, it's like, gosh, they'd be like the first person I want to get rid of, which is ironic, because from their mind, they're protecting themselves, right?
Well, you just want to, I would get, same thing, Mike. Like, that's the Band-Aid I'm going to rip off right away, right? Oh, yeah, they have this specialized knowledge. They're the only person that knows whatever. Cool. Let's rip that off and figure out what we don't know immediately, right?
Yeah. That's
for me, it doesn't come from the skills though, right? Like, I'm actually a horrible Java developer. Don't tell anybody, but I'm not great. But
we'll keep it a secret. Don't tell anyone on the podcast here.
Yeah, nobody, us and like 6 other people are going to know that now.
And your whole team, but
all of our listener is going to know.
They already know. No, they already. It's for me, it's soft skills, right? I struggle with like business terminology, but networking is huge, right? Yeah. I don't worry about ever landing a gig equivalent to what I have now, because I know that, and I make it a point that everybody that I work with, they're having their time of their life, right? And they want to be working with me. So no matter what, like SDG is not going anywhere, but if they were to, there's plenty of people that would love to have me on their team. And I don't worry about it, because I don't worry about job security anymore, Well, for two reasons. One, I've been doing this job for 25 years. I would love to get laid off. I would love to have that 3 months off and, just
With mini vacation.
discover myself, or, go on a eat, pray, love spiritual journey.
Be, man. Just
yeah.
be.
I think we should just ask for sabbaticals here. That would kind of satisfy that.
I asked for a sabbatical and they put it on hiatus.
Darn.
They gave your sabbatical a sabbatical.
I have a broad, I have a particular set of skills. I have a broad, skill set. I can do tech support. I can do intranet administration, service administration, platform administration. I can do server stuff. There's a lot of different jobs I can plug into and do. And then on the soft skills stuff, I've worked with a ton of people that I think liked me. I got one pizza party and a couple happy hours. But yeah, I mean, I had projects that went well. There's a lot of there's consulting, and then there's full-time. And so I feel like there's always going to be some kind of opportunity. And I don't feel like the amount of tech people that gravitate toward those kind of jobs is going to be increasing a lot.
No, it's kind of interesting. I think of job security from the perspective of who would I want to hire, right? Those are the same people you'd want to keep on your team. And when I think of hiring, I think of really hiring in a very basic set of criteria, right? And are they people that you would be and here's a good litmus test. We used to use this years ago when I was consulting. If you had to sit next to them on a flight from New York to Hong Kong, could you sit in the middle row with them and be okay when you got off the plane? Or do you feel like you need to strangle them or something, right? Ooh. I mean, there's someone you could get along with, right? And so, number one, can you get along with this person well? Are they going to be someone you feel like, yeah, these seem like they're pretty cool, right? Two, can you trust them? Right, in terms of they have good, good integrity. Are they someone who you feel like, yep, they're going to give you the straight dope, right, and say, yeah, this is what's going on. Are they can they deliver, right? And it's ultimately, can you get your job done? Because no one wants to be in a team where you're picking up this other person's work because they can't get their job done and carry them, right? It's because always now you have you're paying for 5 people, but you only have 4 that are really doing the work, right? Yeah, we've all been there. And so when you look at that in terms of those simple things, and some of that includes some other qualities, like, for example, a willingness to learn, willingness to share information, things like that are kind of part of some of those things we just talked about. But if you look at from the basics of is it someone that I can get along with, someone I can trust, and someone who's technically going to deliver something, and then the bonus is, are they going to help all the rest of us grow, right? then it's good to reflect back on that and say, do I have those qualities? Am I exhibiting those things? Am I someone who's a person who other people wanted me around? Am I a person who other people can say, yeah, I trust them because they're not going to give me some BS answer or give the runaround? Or, am I going to be someone who's going to fail to deliver, right? I want to make sure I'm delivering all the time, right? And so if you live up to those things and someone says, you know what, we're going to have to cull this organization, there's going to be a certain point where no matter what you do, you're going to let good people go. Yeah. Right. Yeah. But if nothing else, you're last on the list of good people to be let go, to let go. Right.
It's funny, Mike, as I hear you describing all those skills and all those things, you're basically describing the ideal SDG consultant, right? Those are all the skills that you need to be a consultant, to go out and, you keep your skill set high, you do, you start new gigs, you meet new people, you're networking, you're getting along with people super well because you have to, because that's your job as a consultant. And all those things. And it makes a huge difference, I think, in as far as feeling secure. I've never personally been laid off, but I've worked as an SDG consultant and been laid off from the company that I was working at, which is a little different twist on it. It's one of the things that gives me a sense of job security at working at SDG, is knowing that SDG's here and I'm going to be fine. I've also, I have been at companies where layoffs are going on around me too, same as you guys. And I've never said, I'm going to wait for the target to rest on my, on me. I'm going to leave on my terms. I've done that a couple of times where it's just like, well, I've made it through the first couple of rounds, but I think I'm just going to go find a little bit something else right now.
There's also something else too, is that when you kind of like exhibit these qualities, you never know who's going to be looking at those qualities, because normally the first instinct is assume that it's like your manager, right? Or maybe your boss's boss, right? Someone up the chain from you. But here's a story. So back in the early 2000s, I worked for this small company in Minnesota that was local here. And we were probably maybe like 130 people, and then we had to set up layoffs, right? So we laid off like 30 people, right? And then, because the funding wasn't coming in and we're still trying to grow, we're losing more money than we're making, right? So we're struggling. One of my friends, who's a product manager, he was just a snarky dude. He said, screw this. I should just cut to the chase. So he basically wrote a memo, and of course this was on paper back in the day, and says, here's all the people who should be fired. Wow. And then just listed off a bunch of people and then just dropped them to the CEO's desk one day.
And was his name first on the list, or did it end up first on the list?
No, his name was not on the list. But here's the funny thing: is that he had the audacity to do that.
Right.
But then the funny thing was that, of course, when there was another couple of rounds of layoffs, but we actually looked at the rounds of layoffs, pretty much almost everybody who he named on that list was on that list eventually at some point. Right. So it's probably wasn't without notice that, there was people that they were probably looking at, management was probably looking at it too from that perspective. But I'm sure that probably didn't go unnoticed too, of like, so get rid of these people. On
the surface, it seems like a total jerk move to do that. And like,
absolutely.
He's pure evil, but it's like, maybe it's identifying like, not who should be on the list, but who shouldn't be on the list.
Yeah.
And then who's ever left over, I'm sorry, but like, I want to make sure that these people still work here. So I'm going to sacrifice these other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. That's a tough situation to be in. I had to go and get all the equipment from a whole division that was getting shut down, a whole facility. Yeah. So I was going in there and walking past people that had boxes of their stuff. And I was just like, don't make eye contact. This is horrible. I'm just going in and grabbing all the equipment and stuff. And it's never a good thing, but like you do recover from that stuff. You do find something else. Sometimes you find something way better.
Well, and like Chad said, you do find something better almost all the time. And the reason that you weren't performing well might have been that it just wasn't the right environment for you, right? Or it just wasn't quite perfect. We've seen people that come into consulting and be like, you are not a consultant. You have, you are technically super good at this stuff, but you are not a consultant. And it turns out they were not a consultant and they moved on, right? So,
and they're usually the ones that figure it out right away.
Of course. I mean, you can't have anxiety of going into an interview or anything like that. And like, this is going to happen to you more than once a year, and you don't like that feeling. So maybe that's, go do that once and get a job at somewhere that you can stay for 10 years.
Wait, you're saying we interview more than once a year?
I'm saying you can. It can happen.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't always happen, Chad.
Stuck.
Yeah. I don't want this whole thing to be about like bummer stories about getting laid off, and that's super depressing.
Let's talk about the positive side of job security.
Yeah, the positive side. And then like part of that is like marketability, right? Like keeping yourself relevant and keeping yourself like being the guy that doesn't have to worry about that anymore, right? Like, and for Mike and I, like I don't worry about it anymore for a lot of reasons. One, I've been doing this for 25 years. My kids are out of school and everything. I could actually fall back on bartending or something like that and be financially stable and secure, right? Like I don't necessarily need all of this anymore. I do enjoy the money, but I'm no longer at the point where like people aren't going to eat if I don't make what I do now.
Right.
That actually, and this sucks for younger folks. That plays in a lot to into my feeling of like job security, self-worth, everything else. Like I feel pretty goddamn happy about the fact that I don't have to stress the heck out about feeding
Right.
kids anymore.
You've got
That's
life
a huge-
security, right?
I have life
Yep.
security.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then having done what we've done for so long, I also and part of that comes along. Minneapolis is a tiny market with massive companies in it. So I don't feel stressed about if I did need this money. It would be easy for guys like Mike and I to say, yeah, we're available. Target, Best Buy, Cargill, whoever, let us know. Right? Like everybody that we've been in contact with for the last 25, 30 years, Mike, they're going to love to have you around. Right? And that's not necessarily tech skills. I mean, that plays into it. Stay relevant. Right? Go to the happy hours. Be the guy that people want to have on their team, and you're not going to have a problem at all.
Right.
There's kind of the interesting you touched on, Chad, which I was thinking about, which was that when you have a safety net, when you have that life security behind you, it does take the pressure off, because then you can feel like I can just focus on doing my best work, right? I could focus on just doing a good job. Years ago, I had worked with a sales manager, and what he always did was, whenever you get a new salesperson, he'd always encourage them to go buy a new house, buy a new boat, buy a new car, go buy a bunch of stuff. Because the more in debt the salesperson was, he said the more they'd be driven to like make their quota, because they didn't want to lose their job because they couldn't pay for their house, car, boat, etc. Right? I think that's a horrible way to like run a business personally, because what happens is now they're driving on that person's fear of losing their job. So now they're like kind of come across as either desperate or super aggressive all the time. Yeah. Because the ability for them to make up for that, is driving them, but it's not healthy, because then they're trying to sell things for the wrong reasons to the wrong people, right? So like us, it's like they're really to focus and say, I'm good at what I do, and I want to do a good job. I want to have a clear head about how do I do a good job in the best interest of my client, right? Right. And in order to do that, if I'm worried about, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to pay my kids' orthodontic bills, or if I got to pay for college tuition and all this other stuff, it's like that's a lot of weight in the shoulders that it kind of adds up over time. But then if you can just focus on, okay, what's the best thing for you as my client, you'll do a better job, right? And I think that you kind of hit that on the head, because it's like that clarity of mind, clarity of purpose.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point with buying a bunch of stuff. Like there's security when you live within your means, when you're not living hand to mouth, when you're actually planning for the future. And I'm not saying go full prepper, but having a plan for that. Like, what if something happened and I was out of work for a while? Could I make it? And that's a part, like Chad was saying, when you have people that rely on you, it's a whole different ball game. Mm-hmm. It's easy for me to say all this, stuff, and I feel job security and all that. I don't have kids. I don't have a wife. Like, if I do something to hurt my career, it's hurting one person. Yep. And it's like I'm fortunate in that regard. I'm sure there's payoffs. People seem to enjoy their children.
I do have a wife and children, and
skills,
yes, there are
soft skills and tech skills and willingness to work and do a good job. And that's, I think, what gives me the most security, is that I think I check all those boxes, and I try to work really hard and add value. And that's not just, that's not the company. That's just how I operate wherever I've worked.
Do you guys remember that SNL sketch with it was with Al Franken, and like he did one a piece with Michael Jordan, was Jack Handy, right? Or it's like it's like the guy who was like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me, right? Yeah. But there's something Stuart about Smalley. That too. Yeah. No, Stuart Smalley, that's who it was, right? But that character, I mean, you think about it, all those things, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and people like me. At the end of the day, that's what it's about.
With Stuart Smalley. Yeah.
Yes, we don't want to hire Stuart Smalley, but those are the qualities that we kind of look for in someone you want to keep around. Someone who's really good enough, smart enough, and people like them, right? And if you're like, you guys are all likable guys, it's like, yeah, of course I want to keep you guys around. You feel bad because it's like, oh, they're not just a complete jerk, right? Yeah, of course. And they're good.
Yeah, I got to say, like 99% of the time I'm talking to another SDG person laughing.
Yeah.
Or enjoying conversation. We're enjoying what we're doing.
All right. So statistically, there's 2 SDG people that don't laugh. Who are they, Kyle? Name them.
I froze up.
So time is another one of those things that helps us, as sort of the generation that isn't just out of college. But even to those folks, and to be honest, I had probably less fear of being laid off or had more job security right out of college than I did any other time, because, it just kind of carries through, or I've had the exact same 100% sense of job security forever. But I was hungry. I was, I wanted to do everything I could to make an impression. And so I worked as hard as I could. I learned as much as I could, and then moved on, which, is what happens to a lot of people out of college, right? You get that first job, you get that first experience, and maybe it fit, maybe it didn't, maybe there was something that looked really cool just off to the side because of somebody that you'd worked with before, like, oh, they're doing something really cool, I've worked with them before, I think I'll go work for them, with them at this other thing, and that'll be fun. But all along that whole spectrum, you've got sort of that keeping up your skills and being hungry, and then kind of getting to have experience, have a network, have all these other things. So, obviously IT is a outstanding industry, and I still don't think ChatGPT is going to put us out of business.
No,
because
so it's just another tool.
Yep.
That
it's just
it's like a calculator with words.
Yeah.
And other things.
Yeah, we were talking about networking, and one of the things I was thinking about networking, as we kind of talked about this, was that years ago I used to kind of think about like networking as like, hey, there's people who I want to make sure I connect with because they're going to get me a job, and people who are like up, moving up fast, or they're leaders and stuff like that. And I think it's one of those things which is interesting is over time, I realized I wasn't necessarily getting referrals from those people. There was just people I just met along the way and had a really good rapport with, where people were like, oh yeah, I want to hire Mike because, I've worked with Mike and we got along really well and we had a good relationship. And so over the years, I stopped focusing on like trying to, network for the sake of networking, and just make sure that, I'm just being a good person to people that around me who I really, care about the quality of their work, and I really want them to be successful, and just try to be a good partner to them. Because I think there's something to be said about like, if people see through the fact that, oh, they're networking because they're trying to get something from you or whatever, right? And and maybe I'm just really bad at that, but but I think that there's like more of a sincerity about the fact that, hey, when someone, that someone really wants to help you or goes out of their way to help you, like, wow, that's somebody they got my back. I want to like help get their back too. So if like there's some opportunity that comes up, I think they're really good for, hey, then, I can like put it into the SDG queue and away we go. Right. And I think that those tend to be like relationships that are definitely ones that, the ones you build as organically as you go, and are like positive relationships, continue to cultivate those. Because, you never know. A lot of times they become friends and coworkers later, or, become friends outside of work. Like this one colleague of mine I worked with in New York back in 1996, 97, and I still keep in touch with him, lives in Pittsburgh. We've, seen each other like only a handful of times over the past 20 years, but we become really good friends. And, you just never know who are the people who are going to stick around in your life that may be coworkers now, but maybe like lifelong friends.
Yeah, very true. I cut it off
the minute I leave the company. Hey, we're done. I'm never talking to you people like that.
It's weird. Like,
lose my number.
I don't try to force anything. I realize that a lot of, relationships with coworkers are because you're coworkers.
Yeah.
But, people move on and you survive, and you stay in touch with some people, and some people you don't, but you see them later on in life and you're like, hey, how are you doing? It's not that you don't care about them, but I think, back to job security, if you can have both that personal security in yourself, that trust in your own skills and abilities, but then also have like a good gig where like, okay, I'm focused on taking care of my company. And so I know that they're going to be focused on taking care of me. So
Yeah,
it's like that relationship between you and the place you work.
For me, the best job security is not thinking about job security, right? Like if
Yeah.
I'm not thinking about it, then it's there, right? I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
And along the way, everybody's doing the right things, right? Like SDG is talking about having a bench and making smart financial decisions so that they don't quickly go to ruin as soon as the stock market loses a half a point or something like that.
Right.
So those kinds of things help make all of the elements that we've talked about they get filled in as you go along just because they do. Right.
The other thing that helps, and for me, is like Peter kind of touched on it a little bit. Like when you started out right after college, if you were able to go, or whatever other education you might have come from,
right?
You are kind of hungry to start with, right?
Yeah.
Super.
I would probably get a little tense if I ever lost that, because I still try to do a little bit more.
Yeah.
Day to day than some peers might, mostly just because I'm bored. No, I'm not. But I actually get a lot out of it, right? Like we do, project I'm on, we do a couple of things. We have standing after work events. We have annual events that we do. We have all of these things to keep people engaged, to keep people active. And the fact that, me and my buddy on the project have set those up, like we feel pretty safe. Always, right? Not only with our client, because they love what we're doing, how we're doing it, and the fact that we're keeping people engaged, which is a huge thing, right? Especially on longer projects.
Yeah.
So I feel super safe, super secure with the client I'm working with. I feel even more secure with SDG. But all of that just accelerates my feeling of security, safety, everything else, right?
Right.
Participate in things. Don't just, the bare minimum is when I would be nervous about, right?
Yep.
Not saying there's anything wrong with, if you're a busy person doing 8 hours, not ever going to a post-work event, none of that stuff, that's great. That's great. It would stress me the hell out, right? If I was worried about money, if I was worried about anything, that would be difficult.
Because you don't make any connections that way. You don't have that good rapport with people. It takes time.
That's one of the things I really like about working at SDG is you can, like, how much you want to engage is up to you. And, we want you to take care of your life. And sometimes people just don't have anything left in the tank to go and do extra this, extra that. But it's like, yeah, you're doing a great job for your customer. You're doing your status reports and putting your time in.
That's the trade-off though, right? And you're probably going to be one of the most secure people in any organization.
Right.
You could do the opposite end, and you could probably, and you might feel a little like, oh, I'm not going to pick up any new skills. I'm going to maintain this Access database until it's not needed anymore. And I guarantee you, the minute that Access database isn't needed anymore, you're not needed anymore.
How many COBOL developers did that, right?
Yeah, right. Yep. They made a killing on Y2K and then not much else.
And then all the COBOL work went away.
Yeah, I guess I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know many COBOL developers. I know one or two. I know one really well. But they're not necessarily doing COBOL anymore.
Right.
A lot of my security or confidence and my work comes from, I guess, realization that I can still learn stuff. If things change, I can ramp up. I can figure things out. I can learn a new skill. I'm not
Python.
done yet.
But I think there's more to it than that, right? Because I think that as a manager or employer, we always look for the people who are constantly upping their game, constantly improving their skills, not just for the sake of improving their skills to look for another job, but to say, hey, I want to get better at my craft because I want to make better code. I want to make it more efficient. I want to make our product better, right? And so the people who, the ones who are the A players, I always view as the people who say, you know what, I'm willing to learn, but I'm also willing to bring it back and share it with the rest of my team of, hey, did you guys like, see like this really cool new way we can do this, or this new library that can really help us out, right? They're bringing things back to the team and sharing. And there's a certain huge value in that generosity, because then people in teams say, wow, that's really cool. I learned something, or this made my life a lot easier. That made us more efficient, right? And people appreciate that, right? So I think that, that kind of goes hand in hand with like constant growth. And there's also that generosity of like sharing that too with other people.
Yeah, I've, like the people that I've worked with at SGG within my technology, it's been Ben. And we are always sending each other stuff about new things coming out and things going away. He sends me more than I send him. So I got to get on that. That's the thing. It's like steel sharpens steel. You make each other better, build those relationships. If you don't have a person out there that you're exchanging that stuff with, then find someone and just start sending them stuff. Did you know about this? Did you know about that? Open up the lines of communication and make those internal partnerships, because that will accelerate your growth as well. Even like somebody to sit and watch a training video with. Like sometimes it can be tough watching that stuff on your own.
Every time.
It's like, hey, let's get together, have lunch, or we're gonna watch this thing on this new deal that's coming out.
I think that there's also like a lot of benefit in like our practices too, right? Because we have our practice meetings, and we have like these training events that we have that like, hey, we're doing like whether it's brown bags or or COP or SCG presents presentations and talks and different things, and those topical things if they're like on the technical side can be really valuable for people. And I think that a lot of people do get quite a bit out of them too, because they're really insightful or interesting, and it's like, oh, this is a new tech I've been hearing about but I don't know much about. Great way to learn about it. And it's sharing from one end, but then it's from the people who are receiving it. It's a great way to continue upping their game. And so like a client may ask about it, so what, I don't know this technology yet, but I know a little bit about it, and I can but I know somebody who does, and we can find out more if you're interested, right? And that's kind of like that checks off the continuous learning, the sharing, and also networking all in one shot. So there's a lot from those practice meetings than a lot of that we do internally. I mean, they're really there's a huge amount of value there.
Ted, I know you mentioned keeping up with Java even on the podcast in the past about like there's a Java book, I read it, it's cool, I don't read it every day, it might keep my monitor up or whatever, but as the yearly releases or however often Java's going, those changes come in, you keep in touch and keep on top of things, right?
And so for me, it's my continuous education is mostly around like patterns, right? Like I honestly could care less about core language features and core language functionality,
right?
But understanding the patterns, right? Like, oh, how are we doing authentication these days? It's OAuth. Here's all the different flows. Cool, I got that down. How are we doing integrations these days, right? That's the kind of stuff that I focus on. I do read, there's one Java book, when there's a new edition, I get it every single time. It's Josh Block's Effective Java. He's actually he's actually employed by Oracle now writing the language, but he's always written probably the most eloquent guide on when and when not to use certain features of the language. So if there's a new version of that book that comes out, I'll get that. I'll read through that. And it's actually kind of, it's engaging. I enjoy that book. Outside of that, though, like I don't necessarily need to learn every single framework. This is why I get grumpy with front-end development. God bless all of our front-end developers. I love each and every one of them.
Yes.
And I appreciate the hell out of them for staying on top of what seems like constant flux in that area of what we do. I am very happy to keep up on Java, the stack, and the patterns, and operate at that level and trust that there's going to be someone out there that can teach me Vue or teach me React or teach me how to do a couple of little things if I need to. But yeah, I like really, as far as technical skills, core features, kind of, I keep up on that. Core patterns, especially. And then like AWS will throw everything into chaos and with a new whatever, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
There's lambdas or there's gateway. There's all these different things out there.
There's 40 different new features.
Yeah. So Yes, I keep on like sharpness for me is like broad brushstrokes, not necessarily like little nitty ditty.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Peter, how it is on the .NET side for you, but
Same.
kind of the same maybe.
Yeah, and like you said, I have enough base to figure out details if I need to run down that path, but I can catch all the incoming, things without getting too nuanced about it or too detailed about it, just to kind of keep an eye on it and know that it's happening.
Yeah.
And know a framework or two, but who's doing jQuery these days? Not many people. Who's doing Knockout? Nobody. Who's doing Mustache? You didn't even know it existed. Maybe all of these things. Yeah, those things existed, but not using them anymore. So.
Like, I don't have that. I don't have Mustache.
Yeah.
Like just earlier this week, there's this new thing called Data Fabric, right? I'm like, this seems to be a new. Well, maybe it's not even new anymore, but I'm starting to hear about it every couple of weeks. And so I should figure out what the heck this is. And then had a happy hour with a buddy that just walked me through it. Right. And that's how I learn now. Right. Like, all right, I'm going to read basically whatever the equivalent of the Wikipedia page is about a thing.
Yep.
And then find an expert, buy him some beers. And that's where it's going to sit until I
let them share their expertise. Right.
Yeah. So
tell me about the good stuff, because then you're not having to like wade through all of the overhead in the articles and all the other, like, I don't need a story. I don't need an anecdote. Just tell me the one thing that I need. What's the pattern I need? I don't need the story, the pattern, or when you were a kid. So you find someone that's already like dug into it, and they can just kind of give you the nuggets you need. That's huge.
So, Mike, for Peter and I, it's easy for us to talk about how we keep the top of tech stack issues, right? And our like hard skills. But you're in a different role, right? Like you're in project management, you're in delivery.
Yeah.
Is Agile here to stay? I feel like it feels like a fad.
Well,
it's okay.
It's kind of like, well, it's as much of a fad as like the internet's a fad, right? I mean, for a while the internet we're slow touch and go, right? I think that the Agile's been around for like 20 plus years now, if not a little longer than that, and and Scrum has been pretty much solidly a part of a lot of businesses. And I'd say something like over 80% of, corporate America has Scrum teams of some sort in their organizations, right? So it's not going anywhere. But the challenge in the PM and, and the PM and you can say the leadership perspective of the world is that we don't have like tech stack changes like you would do on the technology side. There's not like there's this new methodology we need to learn. It's like it slowly evolves over time. So for us, it's more about gaining and refining proficiencies. So it's like saying that, if you have a good skill set in Scrum, right, then it's like, how do we refine our skills? How do we learn better ways to facilitate a team? How do we learn better ways to run a planning poker meeting, right? How do we, learn better ways to deal with risk management, right? And refining the skills that we have, because every client we go to is a little different. Every engagement is a little different. In fact, every project can be a little different too.
Right.
So it's how do we increase the depth of our skills, even though the breadth of them isn't really significantly changing. Every once in a great while there may be some new thing that comes along, kind of like Scrum that came along 10 years ago that we all started learning over the years. But then 2 or 10 years from now there might be something completely different, right, that will supersede it. We don't know what that is, but until that point it's like, let's continue refining, learning, and then maybe there are some other things that do come up, and for the most part the vast majority of those will fail, but there may be some takeaways from those that we can use and cherry pick that says, this is a really good idea that we're not using. We can apply this here and see how we can take some of those nuggets and apply them into what we do on a day-to-day basis. Kind of like stand-up meetings, and started off as something that was part of an Agile practice, part of Scrum. But then a lot of teams, even though without doing Scrum, said, hey, this is just kind of a good practice for us because, we don't practice Scrum. But, it's a good way for us to kind of communicate, kind of start the day off and kind of figure out kind of what we're doing and make sure we're on the same page, embracing some of the velocity with it without actually the baggage of, doing that framework, right? So I think there's a lot to be learned from that. But for us, our worlds are different because we're not necessarily having to refine the tech stack, having to learn this new tool set every single time we're going out there. There's a lot more continuous learning about what's new, and some different approaches and self-improvement.
Any parting thoughts about job security, Peter?
Steel sharpens steel. I like that phrase, and I think we'll stick with it.
It's okay. I got it from somewhere else.
No. Nothing useful to anybody that's only been around for a couple of years. Once you've been at it for a while, you don't worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
At least not in our I mean, this is so privileged, right? Like in our industry, we don't necessarily worry about it anymore. If I was working at a grain mill or working at
coal miner
or any kind of it's a different thing. We're talking about IT and consulting, and if that's your career, work hard for 5 years and then work harder for 20 more, and you'll be fine.
Yeah,
that's
right.
It.
I think there's things you can control and things you can't control. We can't control the economy. You can't control what businesses choose to do at a leadership level. You can't control, a lot of things about like the stock market or whatever. But focus on what you can control, which is like always continue to improve your skill set, doing good work, and just being a good person, just like Chad described, not so eloquently.
Yeah.
But I think it's so important just to, if you do those things, people will look at you and say, hey, I'd love to have them back in my team. Be that person that someone wants to hire, right? And, I think that, for the most part, 99% of the time, you'll still want, from the things that are out of your control, right? It's like, well, you'll be valued somewhere else. Right. So just be a good person.
My parting thought is going to be something that my best friend's dad used to say to us when we were younger. He'd say, you know what? You're good kids. You're smart. You're going to be fine. That's my parting thought. And with that, I think we should just say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Hey. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.